Today we're going to talk a little bit about ceramics that we find during archaeological excavations in Portsmouth and some of the attributes that help us differentiate ceramic types from one another. One of the main things to look at when we find a ceramic sherd is the body or the fabric or paste. Because ceramic artifacts are typically broken, we can look at the clay in profile and see how thick it is, what color it is, whether there are inclusions in it, like gravel, or temper added on purpose, like sand, to stabilize the clay. We can also look at the color and design of different decorations. So the glaze, the hand painting, plain glaze. We can also get a sense, even from small sherds, of vessel form. So this is a teacup, which it's easy to tell now that it's been mended. But even if we were just looking at the curve of the rim or of the base, we might be able to get a sense of its size and shape. We can also learn about the temperature that different vessels were fired at. Here are two examples of ceramics that were recovered from the Marshall Pottery Site, a local pottery production site here at Strawbery Banke. Here's an example of what happens when ceramics are put in a kiln that's too hot. This little saucer has been overfired and essentially melted and fused together. This rim of a redware tankard or vessel, on the other hand, has been underfired, so the glaze is flaking right off of the rim. The kiln wasn't hot enough to help the glaze stick. These are all examples of coarse earthenwares. Compared to other types of ceramics, they have a thick body and are decorated with a thick glaze. These are examples of a coarse earthenware type called North Devon. North Devon ceramics were manufactured throughout the 17th and most of the 18th century. North Devon wares have a pink or grayish body and often have gravel inclusions in the clay. The glaze, like on these three dishes, is usually a yellow or greenish lead glaze. The sgraffito or scratch design on these wares is pretty typical of North Devon, and this bird motif that you see on this milk pan and this saucer are common folk art designs for England. These ceramics are all examples of a combed slipware, often referred to as Staffordshire type, made in Staffordshire, England. Staffordshire type slipware was made between 1680 and 1780. The clay used for making this slipware is a light buff colored, often with some gravel inclusions. But what really defines the Staffordshire type is this combed design. Here you can see it's just little dots on this little teacup. Here are a couple examples of a coarse earthenware called redware. Redwares were made in both England and in the colonies and produced between 1500 and through at least 1750. The major defining characteristics of redware are the orange or reddish clay and red glaze that are used to produce redware. In some cases, redwares are unglazed, and in other cases, they might have a black glaze, like this milk pan, but the body is always red. Here are some examples of refined earthenwares. In the 1700s, English ceramics manufacturers were able to industrialize the process of making ceramics. Usually the refined earthenwares that we find are for table use rather than utilitarian purposes. So you see a lot more dinner and tablewares in this assemblage versus the more utilitarian or barwares in the coarse earthenware assemblage. Overall, refined earthenwares have a thinner body and a much more refined paste. Here's an example of the earliest type of refined earthenware we find in archaeological excavations in Portsmouth. This is Delft, or tin-glazed earthenware. Delft is specifically produced by the Dutch, but English ceramics manufacturers also produced a tin-glazed earthenware. The Dutch were producing Delft as early as 1571 and continued to manufacture it through the 19th century. The blue and white pattern or design is really common for Delft. Sometimes archaeologists refer to Delft as M&M ware because the glaze is so thin and flaky that after being buried in the soil for a long time, moisture permeates the porous body and the glaze flakes right off. This is an example of a refined earthenware made in England called Wealdenware. Some people also call it uglyware. It has a refined, buff body, but its main characteristic is this mottled or sponged green and brown glaze decoration. The molded flowers are also common. Wealdenware is basically a type of creamware. You can see inside the yellowish lead glaze. Wealdenware was produced between 1740 and 1775. The short-lived success of Wealdenware led to the production of creamware, a very common refined earthenware that was manufactured between 1762 and 1820. These are all examples of creamware, although you can see that the level of creaminess or the whiteness varies considerably from vessel to vessel. Creamware has a buff or creamy colored body, and its unifying characteristic is the lead glaze that gives it a clean, creamy color that is slightly yellow. It's also much more refined than earlier wares, as you can see by some of these ornate molded patterns. These are examples of another type of refined earthenware called pearlware. British ceramics manufacturers wanted to have a cleaner, more white color. So in 1775, they began adding cobalt to the lead glaze they had been using on creamware to make it look more white. This gave it a bluish tint. You can often identify pearlware because the blue glaze collects or pools along the rims of vessels. Blue and white designs, or these shell edge designs, are also super popular versions of pearlware. Pearlware was produced from 1775 through the 1800s and includes decorations that are molded, transfer printed, and hand painted. Because British ceramics manufacturers were really interested in producing something more like porcelain, you also see lots of examples of Chinese patterns or motifs on British pearlware. The next major group of ceramics I want to talk about are stonewares. Stonewares are made mostly in Europe of pure refined clays and are produced with a high firing temperature, which makes them very dense. Many stonewares are utilitarian and mass-produced, but you also see tablewares made from stoneware. The main defining characteristic of stoneware is its distinctive glazing technique. During the firing process, salt is thrown on the ceramics in the kiln, which gives it a pitted texture in the glaze that looks a little like a porous orange peel. Some of the nicest stonewares are made in Germany. These two tankards are examples of a German stoneware called Westerwald. Westerwald was produced between 1600 and 1775. Westerwald has this distinctive gray clay body, has a salt glaze, and it often has this blue painted design along with rouletting or incised lines or fine designs inscribed on the side. The British were also producing stoneware. These examples are called English white salt glaze stoneware. These were produced between 1720 and 1775. English white salt glazed stoneware has a distinctive light gray body with a white slip. And the English used various patterns, although this basket weave pattern on these plates is a very common and popular one. Some English white salt glazed stoneware also has hand-painted designs, like on this tankard, and some of it was left plain, like this chamber pot. The last major category of ceramic types that I'd like to tell you about is porcelain. These are all examples of Chinese porcelain, which the Chinese have made since 200 BC and still make today. That's since the Han Dynasty. Chinese porcelain is distinctive from the other earthenwares and stonewares we've talked about because of its very fine, clean clay. The Chinese used a very fine, clean clay to make their wares so thin and delicate. British people and British colonists in the American colonies really wanted to stock their houses and shops with porcelain, but it was very expensive to import to England, let alone to the colonies. So that's why we see examples of Chinese motifs on other wares like pearlware. But this is the real deal Chinese porcelain. The blue hand-painted designs are very common for the types of Chinese porcelain that we see imported to the colonies in the 18th century, but we also see some examples of very colorful hand-painted designs, like on this large punch bowl.